Okay, so it is recording. Welcome to week number 5 already. This is incredible that the semester is going very quickly, or the term. What I'll do is we'll do a quick look back. I just want to remind a couple things, and then we'll jump into the collaboration stuff. So let's just, so I'm going to hit view as a learner so that we're looking from the perspective of what you guys can see today. So remember, everything is timed in bright space, so you can only see things as they start to appear. I try to keep throwing out announcements, in the latter parts of the week, just to nudge everybody to either get to the discussion board and get some ideas in, which have been great, by the way. This week's discussion, I'm loving it. For those who participated, thank you so much, because it actually gives me a lot of insight. Just as a quick side, for those who haven't seen Revisto, a lot of you talked about Revisto, which is impressive. I like that. A lot of you were talking about BIMTrack as well, which in IBI, we don't actually engage with Revisto right now, but we do with BIMTrack. So it's very interesting that collaborative ends from the issues tracking and clash management. A lot of you have found or have had previous experience with, so that's quite impressive. But yeah, I pressed the discussion board and the week 3 assignment. I don't want you guys to lose sight of that. So the discussions, just a reminder, midnight after each class, so I give a little bit of reprieve on that. Go in, add some ideas based on the hybrid learning. This is a hybrid course, so the idea is 2 hours on your own, 2 hours all of us together, and together we do virtual, a live virtual. So the idea of the alone hybrid is just get you thinking. Again, there's nothing wrong or right with what you put. It's just I want to see ideas, or get you to have a feel of the content that we're going to talk about in the week to come. So that's the reasoning for it, and I simply mark it as a yes, no, or done or not done type thing. The assignments right now, week 5 just opened right now, so we're going to talk about that today. The week 3 assignment is going to close a week today. So please, that's a furthering. You did that, anyone who participated in the discussion topic, you did an initial taste of comparing the 2 templates. I just want you to do a deep dive into that. Again, if there's any questions, feel free to email me, or if there's time at the end, we can talk about it. But don't let it sit, because for me, this week 5 assignment, this is my favorite one of the term, to be honest. It's because collaboration is something that I've had a passion for in my career. So that assignment is open. And the quizzes, you guys have already completed the week 2 quiz. Right now, there's nothing open. Next week, we'll have another quiz that'll start. So I don't want too many things to overlap at once. So you'll see week 3 assignment will close on the 12th. Week 6 quiz opens that same day. So I've tried to stagger them, so only 1 or 2 things are active at the same time, knowing that you have stuff from the other classes as well. So yeah, so just keep in mind that that's coming, and you can see here the quiz schedule as it runs. Okay, so let's go to the content here. And from what you'll see as the learners, right now, week 5 just became active, became active last week. Week 6 is going to become active after this class. So week 5, the focus here is all on collaboration. And after I go through the presentation, the week 5 assignment is now visible to all of you as learners, and I want to talk a bit about this. But I want to do it in the context of what we've already just seen. So I'm going to go back to the instructor. Let's just jump into the content of the week, and then we'll circle back to the assignment, and then we can have any, or you know what, before we do that, are there any general questions, just from an administrative side, looking back to anything that's active? Anybody, just put your hand up, I can unmute you. Okay. All right, so just think, if you have anything, just keep them in mind, and we'll talk afterwards. So let's get into this week's content. And again, just to paint the picture of where we started and where we're headed to. Okay. So again, we started with, what is BIM, all the possibilities. In week 1, we hinted at collaboration, and today is going to deep dive into that. I stress the client requirements. We can't be BIMing things. We cannot do the BIM process if we don't know why we're doing it. Are we doing it just for ourselves, for a contractor, for an owner, for a public agency, for all of them? What are we doing? How are we doing it, etc.? That all leads into how you plan it. So no matter what the decision is, whatever comes out of your client requirements, we have to plan it. There's template plans, UK versus North America. When you scatter across the world, some have made unique plans. Many jurisdictions have grabbed either the North American or the UK plan, and some have jammed them all together. That is what it is, and that's out there. So I always stress BIM is about the process, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. And actually, it's funny, if your only takeaway from this course is, what are you BIMing and why are you BIMing it? I love it, because I say that, I've been doing this for, over a decade now, just trying to do BIM leadership and BIM management. And I ask the same questions. What are you BIMing? And I get this look. I'm like, okay, step back. What are you doing? Just tell me about the project so we can figure out what there is to BIM and why we want to do it. In order to do it, inevitably, there is software. We need software. We need to author our tools, author our content, our components. Last week, we talked about building civil and plant-based softwares, as well as review tools, point cloud tools, and rendering tools, etc. It wasn't meant to be exhaustive. And in the online portion of last week, there were some interesting tools that were raised. There's no end game when it comes to tools. When we get to defining a technical solution in week 8, technically, you can use anything if it makes sense. And what you're going to see from the assignment this week is, the world isn't going to be easy, unfortunately. One of the questions last week, the dialogue, when it makes sense if everything was just in Revit. It would be easy, definitely easy, but as I think I said in my experience, I rarely have projects like that. Rarely. This week, we're going to talk about collaboration, and then we're going to deep dive into BIM uses, deliverable requirements, an wholehearted solution, and then have fun with legal. And I do want to remind you all, when we get to the last 2 weeks, we are going to be doing live presentations. So I did some work last weekend just in the system here. So I'm not sure what you can see yet, and I haven't done that perspective yet, but just to make you all aware, I have actually assigned you all into groups. I basically took alphabetical order. There's 8 groups, 7 of 4, 1 group of 5. So I just basically went down the list and assigned you all in groups. That final presentation, when it opens, it'll all be a group-based submission. So I want you to be aware of that. And in week 14, once the presentation opens, part of the week, the entire week 14 is going to be you all presenting. So just make sure that you're all okay with microphones and connectivity via here, because based on the 8 groups and the 2 hours, you'll have so much time to present. But we'll get to that. It'll be a fun part, in my opinion. So you guys will be fine. But this week on collaboration, I'm going to talk through the concepts. And while I'm doing this, you can go and have a sneak peek at the assignment if you want right now. But I just want, the point of the assignment is I want you to be able to present these diagrams. So I'm going to talk through this here. But basically, I'm going to give you some project ideas and say, how would we share? That's the assignment. Here's 3 cases. How would we share in each case? And in all of the assignments going forward, keep in mind that, they're all, I'm trying to design them all around you all being placed into a firm, whether it is design, construction, or an owner's entity, an owner operation entity. And you're sitting there trying to convey to the stakeholders, this is what we have to do. So in a nutshell, let's be very simple. I have a Revit model. I need to share it with 4 people in 4 different firms. I need to buy a system. The system costs money. It might have infrastructure. It might be cloud-based. We might need a better internet pipe. So I need to spend all this money in order to connect these people in order to achieve this result. And pretend I'm the person you're trying to sell the solution to. So this week's assignment is about how do you depict that? And then what would you depict? So just keep that in the back of your mind and for when we get to that, the assignment overview. But collaboration basics. So for me, collaboration is one of the most overused term in the industry, and I want to say in the world. You hear, we have to collaborate. When I started an IBI group, I said, Brent, you've got to solve collaboration. That's what I was told. So I said, okay, I got to do it. And then I started asking, oh, wait a minute, what do you mean? Because I think BIM collaboration. And then I heard people say, well, you've got to make us talk to each other. And I said, oh, that's very different. That's not what I'm thinking. So I quickly, this is sparked out of my work both at CH2M Hill previously and now in IBI. There's a difference between the BIM world and the IT world. And I do this because, you know, instant chatting, what we're doing right now with GoToMeeting, not BIM collaboration. It's a mechanism that we could use as a medium like this to connect. But in the world, when I'm trying to define a BIM collaborative solution, you can tell me we're going to use WebEx, I think Zoom is one, Skype for Business, Citrix GoTo, whatever. The point is we're going to be speaking virtually. Done. And you can tell me whatever system that could work, and it's great. And for me, this is one of, I think, 6 systems that I have accounts for because I interact with external agencies. It's all good. But these items, I look at these things and I'll say, okay, when we're trying to define a BIM collaborative solution, we're really focusing on BIM authorship and BIM sharing. All these other items we need, but that's not for me. So for me, I depend on my IT service provider. So in IBI group, it's internal. It could be an external service provider, the whole IT consultation. I know some of the discussion board, virtual servers or VDIs, virtual desktop infrastructure, all good, right? As a BIM manager, the idea would be, let's harness it, not let's design it, architecture it, and implement it, okay? So you might advise on what could work or might not work for some of our authoring tools, yet we're not designing and implementing the tunnels for a VPN. And I hear that a lot in IBI. Is Office X able to talk to Office Y? I'll say, I don't know, but if Office X and Y are working together, they better be able to talk. IT, make them talk. Just make them talk. And that's it. They need a VPN tunnel, give them a VPN tunnel. Printers and plotters get talked about so much, and it's like this legacy realm of paper delivery that just can't go away yet. But that's okay. As I said, these items are all critical, important. I do want to stress the internet service provider. The more and more cloud we do, the more and more vital that is, to the point where not only are they vital, but they're vital to might requiring a backup. So there is, I'll be asked, Brent, is one ISP enough? I don't know. If the ISP goes down, what's the recovery process? What's the downtime? What happens in the meantime? If my Revit model is sitting in the cloud and I've got, 50 users that cannot access it, that's an issue, especially if we're trying to deliver something or at a critical point on a project. So as I said, these systems are critical, but not what I'm talking about when I talk about BIM collaboration. So I made this slide back on the London Olympics, now 12 years ago, when we were in the design phase. And we were trying to depict, well, what do? We're going to create content. So remember, I keep saying BIM is like a collection of assets, and a collection of components where each asset grows temporally relative to how much information it has. The whole concept of level of development, something could be very rudimentary at the start, geometrically it can grow, data-wise it can grow, and we want to manage that information, geometrically or data or metadata. We want to deliver it understanding whom we're delivering to, as defined in our BIM execution plan, what the delivery mechanism is, and how it's going to be achieved. We want to preserve this content so you're not repeating stuff over and over and over again. And we need to collaborate, share, monitor, understand, maybe know what the key performance indicators are, and be able to judge against what we're doing. The collaboration end is so complex when it comes to the world of BIM. So I always say, or I always want to ask, why do we fail? Because we do fail in this industry. And often I say, because people don't answer these 4 questions. What are we doing? Where? Who's going to lead it? And what's the plan? Right? So this is loosely obviously connected to the what are we BIMing, why are we BIMing it, and put it in the execution plan. And the BIM execution plan talks about the BIM lead or whatever term. Remember, semantically, I said it could be BIM lead, BIM coordinator, BIM manager, BIM, I don't care what you call it, who's leading it. And oftentimes we'll get bogged down with, well, we don't know what we're doing, and we're not quite sure where. And then I look and I say, how can you run a project? How is there a project if you can't answer those first 2 questions? Because it's very explicitly different. If it's just CAD or if it's models. Is it a model that acts like Revit? That's a central model. Are you sharing databases? Which is critical, and I need to stress that because that comes up in one of the examples in the assignment. If it's a database that's tied to SQL and it has to be housed in an office versus housed in Azure or something else. Very critical to think about that. Is my authoring tool, so this is the software end now, connected to something that's tied to a local area network? Okay? And then with the plant tools, like I described last week, that was a major barrier until just recently when you can now get SQL in the cloud, but not everybody has that. So there still are those questions. What has to be where? So what are you sharing? Locations. Are you scattering the disciplines across many offices? Are you scattering the authorship of content across many offices? And are the offices internal to an organization or external? Okay. Obviously, a lot of what you guys put in the discussion board this week, very cloud. I was very happy. A lot of you had good cloud examples. What if it's a Department of Defense in one of our governments scattered across the globe, and they say absolutely no cloud? Absolutely not. You can use a secure tunnel from one office to another, and the data has to maybe be hosted in our environment. Completely different concept. What if you need a secure room? Which I don't think I put in the project examples, but we do have instances like that where it says, I don't care what you do, IBI group, all your effort has to be in a secure room and only security cleared people can access it. Totally different environment. So what are you sharing? Is it cloud? How many locations? The more external entities you have, obviously your options start to get limited. Okay. And it's funny, I say this, a lot of people I want to say they're afraid of the cloud, or there's misplaced cloud fear and some properly placed, afraid of data security, afraid of, speeds, slower speed to go to the cloud versus the faster speed sitting in my desk. All valid discussion points. But then I say, hey, we don't have 10,000 people in our firm, and this is a major multi-billion-dollar project. We're sharing with 10 entities. What are we going to do? We all get in the same building, or we're in the cloud. There's not much more we can say there, right? Somebody has to lead, no matter what. I don't care if it's the project manager. I don't care if it's the BIM lead. I don't care if it's somebody delegated to on the project. When we hear you, Brent, but we're not going to do it. Or don't worry, it'll just happen. That means it will fail, period. If you don't plan it, it will not work properly. Hence this assignment, hence building this into the final assignment and weaving all of this dialogue together. I don't care what's being modeled. So when I'm talking about this right now, I couldn't care less if it's a building, if it's a road, if it's a pipe, it doesn't matter. We're making content, we're making assets that are going to become part of the physical infrastructure of our world, and more than one individual are going to collaborate to make it real. Whether the individuals are local, same office, We're all the only thing for sure is we're all on the same planet as it stands right now. Other than that, anything goes. Then we got to know, based on those first three questions: cost, schedule impacts, do we have resources, how do we deploy, onboarding plan for the teams. I didn't write there, but training. What if it's a complex system that needs training? Some of you mentioned some of the systems that I'm going to talk about today. Some of them are intuitive, some of them are great, some of them people open up and they don't know what to do unless you sit down and show them. So you have to plan all that. The other thing I wanted to stress is WIP shared and published. And these, I want to say I don't know if coined is the right word, but we used very heavily in the initial BS 1192 documentation. So part of the optional, I don't know if it's even listed in the optional reading, but after you guys are done with this course this year, I would highly recommend downloading BS 1192 and the associated PALS 1192 documents and just read them front to back. They're good stuff. WIP shared and published, for me, opened my eyes. This was back on the London Olympics. When we were designing the collaborative environments, it's a whole different world, and we'll start with the easier one. Published content. This is, here's my 30% deliverable. Here's my 100% tender documents. Here are my as-builts. Here's my model as it statically stands today. Here's whatever, front-end design completion. These are all most likely contractual turnovers, but static snapshots. The sharing is basically, I am giving it to you. It could be as silly as an email. It could be Dropbox, Box, Google Drive, OneDrive, iCloud, any of those. It could be a more advanced system that tracks when it was delivered, when it was opened, when it was read, and all that good stuff. But the collaboration is really in the exchange. There will be no changing. If I say this is my architecturally sealed 30% drawing, I'm not giving it to you to change. You can look at it, consume it, give me comments, but you're not changing my 30% contractual deliverable. Shared content is a little different. Okay, this is content that's been authored and deemed fit for a purpose. So usually this would be, for example, a lot of you did BIMTrack and Revisto, BIM 360, all of these environments where we put content in an environment for live commenting, feedback, mitigation, review, understanding, stuff of that nature. Navisworks is a wonderful example of a shared tool. Navigator as well from Bentley. We're feeding the models into an environment, usually pulling multiple streams of information together and saying comment, fix, advise, etc. Okay? A little more challenging. There's usually more content. There's a lot more dynamic nature there. And there's a communication continuum built into that. And then WIP is the most complex. Simplest example, let's say all of us on this call were authoring a Revit model. How would we do it? The beauty is we could do that today. All 30 of us could get on to one of the collaboration systems, and all 30 of us could be live editing a central model. DWGs, DGNs, doesn't matter. There are mechanisms out there to do that. The challenge with WIP is how to do it. So let's say, and I have examples just right there in the text. But let's say we have a project, and this will be in the assignment. I've got some AutoCAD, some Civil 3D, and some Revit. Well, right now, today, we can probably get one or two systems that'll accomplish it all, but not one system can really do everything perfectly. What if I threw in SmartPlant 3D? What if I threw in Aviva, PDMS? And all of a sudden you've got multiple streams of work in progress, and then you have to start to ask, okay, how do we map this? How do we know what we're sharing where? How do we make sure things are connected where they have to be? And then how do we bring them all together for the overall share? And then publishing is usually easy. Usually, I would say. So that's the whole point. define the workflows, the connectivity. This is another diagram we made for the UK, quite complex. So I just want to say this is rooted through BS 1192, WIP shared, publish, archive. And what we're trying to show here is that we've got multiple WIP locations the complexity that could exist with multiple WIP locations. So the way we show this is on the top right, this could be your typical design, what we would see in most parts of the world. Multiple disciplines working together, that could be a facility. Now, what if you have 10 facilities on a campus? So there could be 10, 20 of these in the top right. Then on the left side here, you've got this shared and published continuum where the client has access to information or other approved individuals, but as well, you have other off-branch potential WIP engagements. So specialty suppliers is a UK term, but in North America, we'll say specialty consultants. So even if you have your facility, ARC, Struck, and MEP, very defined there. But now you got a corrosion guy, an acoustical specialist, maybe environmental, maybe lighting, who knows? And we've been on major projects, people movement, transit, people movement, safety, and we've been on projects where they've all kind of tangentially fed into the multiple facilities. So there's a lot to that. So that shared and published is going to be taking from both work in progress or any work in progress to create these packages. And then, of course, we archive what's been done. So you can see, and why I like showing the UK is that they're very complex and they've defined the processes. You know, they're a decade-old process, clearly defined. Here's another view of that previous diagram. This is straight out of the PAS 1192-2 document. So in the middle there, work in progress, shared, published, archive. So that's the fundamental. And you can get as complex as you want to or as you need to, but it's WIP, shared, publish. You're building something, you approve it for sharing, you authorize it for publishing, and you verify for archive. And the reason we divide this, and you might be sitting there saying, Brent, that is so complex. Why not just we all start sharing and we start to see everything? And there are some environments where it's like that. And I'll talk a bit about the BIM 360, the teams versus the doc management when we get to it. We've done a lot of work in IBI exploring the validity. Some systems have security settings, some systems have different functionalities, but the gist is, I'm doing an architectural model of a building. So let's go building familiarity because I'm an architect. I'm doing a model and I'm playing with concepts. Do I want you to take my concepts and start either engineering walls, columns, ductwork, you know, starting to lay out cable trays, maybe place lights and switches, define my the roadway access to the garage of a house or something like that when I'm in concept? So I might be in complete and continual flux. Maybe I'm running a conceptual parametric design program and the model's constantly changing. So I'm going to sit there saying, you know what, all of you just wait. Let me do a bit of work. And then I'm going to, say to you, okay, I have some fundamental things set. Go ahead and start. So I know where if I was a house, I know where the basement is and I know where the garage is going to be. So then civil engineer can start doing the site layout, road access, etc. So I've deemed something shareable for a specific engineer. But I might still say to structural and MEP for inside, you know, still wait. So that's the idea, is that I have this WIP area where I'm not sharing garbage that will waste time down the life cycle continuum of a project. And I'm focusing solely there at the start of the project. Imagine if it was a design build and I am the contractor looking to dig the hole to pour the foundation. Well, I don't want to do that based on structural engineer and architect playing with a Revit model. I want to do that based on something that's deemed appropriate. I might even wait until something's published, saying these are the signed off completed foundation drawings. I will then go dig and start pouring the footings. Because once I pour, good luck having me move the footing, right? So that's the mindset upon which this sort of workflow is built. So things to consider when you're collaborating. What are you doing? What are you sharing? And where is it being shared? Okay, we want to plan the work. And this year, I've used the term the project CAD/BIM lead, just to get rid of it in case there's any remnant BIM myths. Well, BIM is Revit. We're doing civil. We're in Civil 3D. Oh, we're not BIM. We're okay. Not true. Who's the lead? What are we sharing? Is it Civil 3D? Are you using data shortcut projects? And are you sharing your DSP across multiple organizations, or is it going to be stored just in your LAN? And how are you going to do it? Ask the questions. What are your workflows? Is information being authored or consumed? Where is that happening? Because if I'm just consuming information, I'm not part of the WIP area. It's a lot easier to give me a login to something and say, here, go to this location, and after the deadline, you'll see the stuff. Or when you're informed, you'll see it. It's a lot easier than come there and play in our sandbox. Know who's authoring and who's consuming. So your sources. Is it going from Canada to India? Is it going from Australia to Singapore? Or is it going from Toronto to Ottawa? Very different. Are we crossing international borders? European GDPR concerns? Are we worried about data security, data authorship? Is there any personal information being passed over? And then preface everything with, yes, I understand LAN is always faster than cloud. Because I hear this all the time. And I keep picking on Revit because it's in my mind. Oh my God, Brent, you put Revit in the cloud. Now syncing is a little slower. And you go and find out, oh my God, how slow? Well, instead of a minute, it's a minute and a half. And I say, oh, okay, but you're sharing with 10 different people across the globe. So I say it's okay. But I have those dialogues all the time, and you will too. Who decides on the work? That's the other thing. Who decides on the split? Because if you remember those first questions, where are you sharing and what are you sharing, right? So what are you doing and where? I've been on several projects where I've heard, oh, we're just doing a model and it's just going to be right here in this office. I say, great, sounds pretty easy. We'll put it on the server. Sounds good. And then I get the catastrophic emails. We're going to miss the deadline. Everything is slow. Revit doesn't work. Right? Your BIM stuff doesn't work. I find out, well, what happened? I ask questions. Oh, well, we added a person from another office. Well, of course you did. And things got slow because when they press sync, locks up the model, nobody can do anything, et cetera, et cetera. So fair enough. The other question of when you're sharing, I pose the question, the BIM myth of it's one big model, one big ArchiCAD, one big bucket of Revit, one big Civil 3D file, et cetera. And especially with the data shortcuts. Can things be logically split based on where the work is and what they're doing? And I've posed that because I started my career on the Bentley side where there was no central model. And I've said in the past, ProjectWise enables you to have multiple users author a single DGN. Well, that's cool where it makes sense, but fundamentally it was based on files. And it's file by flow stream, file by facility, file by, sometimes it's structural steel versus concrete, whatever is logical. And in my career, especially a decade ago, we would sit at the start and ask who's working on the projects, how many modelers, how complex is it, how should we split the project by floor, by type, etc. Then when I was introduced to Revit, it was, oh, there is no dialogue. Oh, you put everything in the same central model. Oh, and then central models get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I started asking, why don't you split it? Just split it logically somewhere by discipline. And then inside disciplines by fill in the blank. Proper use of work sets, started to look at that. But the questions, my concern as an industry is that we just don't ask the questions. I'd say there's no right or wrong, but if the question isn't being asked, then I think we're missing opportunities. So that's why I'm saying plan at the front, be proactive, and get ready for the dynamic. Because when you go into the world and you're trying to lead this, you'll get the pushback. You'll hear, we've been doing this for decades. And the response is, well, no, you haven't, but okay, you've been doing something for decades. But that doesn't mean that's the right way to do it today. and this world of data interoperability and access to information from anywhere across the globe. Now, we weren't doing that 20 years ago, right? And then just be mindful of any decision or solution we press as BIM leads will be different. And difference is always initially perceived as bad. So it won't be the same. Something might be slower. Something might break. What do I do? Who's going to train me? And at the end of the day, there's nothing utopic in what we're doing, but there's something that will always, always work. If you look through the BIM Handbook of Practice by the Institute for BIM in Canada, these diagrams were in there, and I thought these are pretty good because it really just helps to just visualize LAN, WAN, cloud. So local area network, I'll use this term often in this presentation. This is the simplest and the oldest. The server is the collaborating mechanism to those multiple desktops. And then you have a router to the internet, and you're good. This is very secure, obviously. You can control access. Access to the outside world is usually a challenge. WAN, this is across multiple offices. This is where IBI has had some struggles because WAN is dependent on that pipeline between the offices. And we have some offices where pipelines are a little slower than others. So my favorite, and it's funny, just last week, hey, Brent, everything's working fine out of Calgary and Vancouver, but my goodness, out of Seattle and Edmonton, they're struggling. And I asked, what are they doing? Exactly the same thing as us. Oh. So we're working with IT. This is where, I don't know who the internet service providers are for the local offices. I don't know the download upload speeds. I don't know how saturated their pipelines are. I don't know if they're having any undue latency. Don't know anything of that nature. So you can get IT to trace their network and trace their path to the cloud or to the other offices and see if something's going on. The other big thing is, I don't know if they're streaming videos, watching YouTube, clogging the internet pipeline or the office-to-office pipeline, okay? And then that's cloud. Cloud, you're wholly dependent on that internet pipeline to harness the processing power in the cloud. So a lot of our authoring tools and our sharing and collaborative tools are trying to harness this, where you're locally caching bits and bytes and just the pieces you potentially need when you're doing something user side, or conversely, they're giving you the portal so you're doing the bulk of everything cloud side. And when you look at Citrix Online and VDI type desktop applications where everything is in the cloud and the computer that's in your face right now is nothing more than a portal to the cloud. Very powerful. I would say to you, definitely not the industry norm. So I loved when I was looking at what was in the discussion board, I was saying, yeah, I wish all of this was just the way it is. You'll come out of this, you'll go into some organization. I have just a story of a colleague. She recently left IBI and took on a role similar to mine in a much smaller firm, 20-person firm. She gets there, she texted me and said, oh my God, Brent, they don't allow internet connection. They won't let me use any cloud. They have an old server. And I said, yeah, that's what happens. So think of the power of what's happening today, and then be ready when you go out to be, really, you've got to be convincing on what's right, what in these organized situations would work to better an organization. And this was on LinkedIn a while ago, and I really, really like it. Cloud versus on-premise. And I have this dialogue with IT and with our finance all the time. So we look to consider something new. You see a user fee and you think, oh my God, $50 a month per user, that's ridiculous. And then you start to analyze it. Oh, wait a minute, it saves me all of the on-premise costs. And then you analyze it and say, all right. And for me, my initial preference is always cloud. And I think sometimes I have to step back and say, okay, analyze that for certainty, but the power of the cloud is not going away in this world today. Now, let's talk a diagram here for a moment. So when I started at IBI, and let's say I hired all of you into IBI, and you would say, great, Brent, we heard you talk about collaboration. What do you guys do in IBI today? And I'd say, well, do I have a story for you? So when I started there, I said, let me make a diagram to portray and visualize what we do. Part of it was to give an understanding, and part of it was to say, hey, there's definitely areas for improvement. So in IBI, we have the J Drive, so it's a local map network drive. I came from a firm that didn't use map drive, so initially I thought, okay. And we are able to copy from J Drive to J Drive for projects, sometimes or usually over the WAN. We've explored WAN acceleration as we've needed to try to do that. We've also connected J Drives. So some of our offices where I would say more than 50% plus of the work is done in 2 locations. So long story short, in Toronto, we have 2 offices. So what we've decided was, you know what, instead of 2 separate J Drives like that, we fuse them together so they use a pipeline to a data center. So if I'm in our west office or our main office in Toronto, doesn't matter, it's one local network. So great, that saved me having to worry about how to share between the offices. And then I said, all right, let's talk Revit. Revit works great with that single office J Drive. And then I said, great, well, what about our multiple? So when I came, I discovered, okay, we've got Revit Server scattered across 7 offices. Fair enough, does its thing. And we started exploring C4R. This is an older slide. You can see that 800 a user. It's a little more like 1,000 a user now. But collaboration for Revit, I'll talk more about that later. For me, phenomenal. Completely changed Revit sharing. We also have ProjectWise. Now, I know I saw a lot of you are familiar with ProjectWise, which is great. I do want to talk a bit about that too. I've had a decade plus worth of experience with it, so I know where it dances and I know where it's got its concerns. So we've got ProjectWise and its pricing module, and we have SharePoint. We use SharePoint internally. I discovered it was used for non-CAD or BIM stuff. So anything outside, anything of the project. My first question was, okay, there's a little bit of duality and duplication. I then discovered for contract admin, we use these 3 pieces of software, SATS, Logonware, and Nuforma. And I said, okay, that's interesting. 3 things, very similar, very similar. So you'll find this when you get out in the world and you sit there saying, well, why would you do that? You know, Brent, you can take the stuff in Nuforma and maybe do a bunch of that in ProjectWise and just use ProjectWise and get rid of all your J Drives. I know, but this is the discovery you might have to do when you go into your firms. All of this stuff is governed by what we have, this iDrive, so another map drive that's used for our standards or our data set. Pen tables, hatch patterns, line weights, all that good stuff. AutoCAD, MicroStation, etc. And we replicate that across our infrastructure. So at least that was consistent, which is great. And then we have a feeding. And then we have what we call community SharePoints. So outside of the world of a project, I might want to say to you, here's your template BIM execution plan. Here's your template, whatever. Go and find it. Here's how we work in our environment. And there's feedback to that. And then I started to say, okay, great. Well, can any of this stuff talk? So there's syncing mechanisms to get ProjectWise to talk to servers. How does ProjectWise talk to Revit models? What about ProjectWise to SharePoint, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I discovered, oh, there's other sites for published. Aconex, A-Site, 4Projects, Business Collaborator, Unity, Asai, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And depending on where you come from in the world, I saw some of them in the discussion board. There are so many, it's daunting. So I looked at this picture and I said, well, that's just fascinating. And that's my firm, or that was my firm as of maybe a year and a half ago. Then you have the beauty of, oh, now we're on a joint venture. Okay, so Brent, you work in company X, all of you work in a different company, and then we've got to compare how we all work and map what we're going to do for the project we're sharing. So there's a standard way for your office, and there could be different ways for joint venture projects. It's a fun environment, and this is kind of what we want to get to. At the end of the day, I'll say it really shouldn't matter. It does matter, but it really shouldn't. We should be sharing. We should be accessible from anywhere in the globe to any of our devices for whatever purpose throughout the life cycle of the project. And I'll say, we are trying to get here as an industry. Some of the biggest problems are with our vendors. You know, I think I referenced last time, but you guys all mentioned Revisto and BIMTrack, Fieldwire, BIMCO, Unity. There's all of these collaboration engines that all focus on certain points of the life cycle. Then there are other systems that try to cover the entire life cycle. There are some that are better for WIP, some that are better just for shared. But at the end of the day, when all of these things keep advancing but aren't really talking to each other until after the fact, it makes it a challenge for us. I was in a meeting yesterday, and one of my colleagues said, hey, why don't we try Fieldwire for this little piece of this item we had to address? And I sat there and I said, my goodness, sure, we could explore it, but it would be one more piece of the puzzle. And maybe it's a required piece, but there's too many pieces in the puzzle. So we'll get to software in a moment. I want to talk about virtual teams, because the issue often comes down to what is the nature of what you're sharing. So remembering everything I just said, LAN, WAN, or cloud, okay? That's always on the server, on the surface. If we're going to share, is it my local network, my wide network, or through the cloud? But now think about what you're sharing. So if you're familiar with Revit, this would be very similar. So the concept of a centralized database, okay? Now this can be LAN, WAN, or cloud. It's all fine. This would be your typical LAN. Looks pretty good. You put Revit inside an office on the server and you're all sharing. It works. But then what about this instance? This is the biggest problem with centralized databases, even if it was cloud hosted. So I'm going to caveat that. Think of the assignments when you have a plant-based application requiring a SQL database and you say, well, you know what? I'm going to put it up in Azure. What if in my description I say one individual has a super slow connection, like that structural engineer or that estimator or that project manager? And what if they're trying to access the data, and what if every time they do, the data locks? And I've seen this with plant applications. It happens with Revit when it sits inside ProjectWise. So I make an action and I'm locking some or all of the centralized databases. And then what if I'm the project manager and I'm doing something and then I crash? Nobody else can access the BIM until I relinquish something. Or what if I corrupt it and then we've lost it and we have to go to a backup? And there better be a backup. And then what if there's no backup? And when we get to week 9, what are the legal ramifications of that? What have I promised? What am I guaranteeing? Am I liable for something because my data is being used for something else and dependent upon something else? So think about those. Centralized database. Federated concept. It's kind of like we all own a piece of the puzzle and we're sharing it in one office. This would work fine. So if you've ever used ProjectWise, this would be the concept. In multiple offices, similar thing. File-based. So if you had DWGs and you're XREFing each other's work, DGNs and you're referencing, and then you're sharing it across multiple entities, this is the concept. It's not instant like a synced central model, but you're still sharing content. And, you know, in the world of a ProjectWise, I open my file, I'm editing it. You'll see it when I upload or sync it back to the cloud. Okay? This is the question. So you put everything aside. From a technological standpoint, when we're authoring BIM, is it a centralized or a federated? And if you remember those two concepts, and it doesn't matter semantically what's being used by any of the vendors. Is it one hub of everything or pieces of everything scattered? And then how are we sharing those? That's the biggest question, the biggest question. And that's why when I started a decade ago with Revit, remember I learned Bentley first. You can't share a Revit model. And I'd say, what are you talking about? How can you not share a Revit model? But people were failing in understanding how to share a centralized database. Same with SmartPlant 3D. It can only be done in one office. And I discovered, well, yeah, I guess if you have a massive SQL database and it's sitting inside your one office, I get it. So things like that have to be understood. OpenPlant Modeler and OpenPlant PNID. The minute I was able to cloud host the SQL database, night and day difference. AutoCAD Plant 3D has a cloud host. I can cloud host it in Azure. Again, there's a little bit of slowness, but it works. Codebook for Room data sheets, cloud hosting the SQL database. It works. On the flip side, if I said to you, make a Revit model, but no central model, half of you who know Revit would freak out on me. So you can't have BIM without a central model. And I would say, yes, you absolutely can. Then I'd say, go use EcoSim. EcoSim has no central model. So you would make files based on a logical split of the assets or the content in the BIM, distribute the models to those authoring them, and they'd all come together like puzzle pieces. Then I'd say you could do the same thing in Revit if you really wanted to, but Revit's not really built for that. But I digress. Conceptually, federated, centralized, important. Then I said, great, now think about all the possibilities. WIP, shared, published, okay? Centralized, federated, WIP, shared, published. I'm throwing a lot at you, okay? So actually, before I get to this, that's the summary of everything so far of what I've said. WIP, shared, published, centralized, federated, LAN, WAN, cloud, okay? So if you think of just all the multiple possibilities, it could be federated or centralized. It could be LAN, WAN, cloud, depending on what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that all depends on whether it is for WIP, shared, or published. Okay? So that's your takeaways. A lot of takeaways in this one, but they're so important. I built these quick little menus. I'll bring these in front of people and say, okay, so what are you doing? And, you know, ignore the fact that semantically it's for my internal work. You know, I'd say, okay, non-CAD BIM information. It's a plethora. It doesn't matter. It could be anything. I could have put on here Dropbox, OneDrive, et cetera, but I said, okay, internally, it's going to be our J Drive, our SharePoint, or our ProjectWise. Let's talk about that. And there's costs, location restrictions, et cetera. Our SharePoint is now cloud hosted. It's all up in Azure, so Office 365, we've rolled it out. You might be sitting there saying, well, of course it's Office 365, but no, you might end up in a firm where they still have on-premise Office products. And therefore, their SharePoint servers might all be on-prem. No OneDrive, no anything. So you have to understand that, to be able to have that dialogue with them, to understand what's being used. CAD and BIM content, we would put these options out. I can add to this now and say, well, now BIM 360. BIM 360 along with the Autodesk Desktop Connector opens up something pretty phenomenal for CAD, for DWG-based sharing. So think about that when you're thinking of those collaboration diagrams. When with Civil 3D 2019 now out and the new BIM 360 design, it's now apparently being betaed and about to be released for the data shortcut projects as well, all shared via the desktop connector. So some pretty phenomenal possibilities, okay? But all that aside, you can look at technological advancement and where we want to go, but there's the fundamental simplicities. I have DWGs and I have to XREF other DWGs and I have to share them with either multiple offices or multiple entities. But to solve that, is it Vault, Buzzsaw, ProjectWise, SharePoint? No, sorry, didn't say that. But what are the questions? So here we were trying to drive ProjectWise at the time. And then CAD BIM content, Advanced Civil 3D and Revit is what I was focusing on here. Well, what are we going to do? Are we syncing Revit from multiple locations? ProjectWise, Revit servers, C4R, local servers. Are we syncing content? What are we doing? Ask the question. Are there costs? What are the minimum? In red there, I put remote desktop. And that's a very intriguing solution, okay? I'd have a lot of dialogue in IVI group on whether that's the right solution or not. And, you know, some people used to perpetuate, well, just set up a remote desktop, that's all. So everything is LAN. So imagine that. Everything in this menu here, everything would be J Drive, okay? Local office, plus a remote desktop. So I would always argue the cost of the cloud, for me, I want everything cloud, don't get me wrong. But if I have a project that's 99% in one office, and I've got one user from somewhere else in the firm, why would I disrupt the collaboration solution as opposed to just setting up a remote desktop? Okay, get the system, work with IT, have it set up, dedicated to the user, they remote in, and they work. Now they need a good connection, with proper graphics, etc. They have to put up with, it might be a bit of latency in what they do versus the response. It is what it is, but it's possible. But then I have arguments, well, why don't you set up 10 remote desktops? Why don't you set up 50 remote desktops? Then you start getting into, okay, there could be different solutions. Maybe it's a VDI, virtual desktops in a massive infrastructure. Maybe it's Citrix. And you can start to explore all of those things. But there's costs to everything, hence the existence of our cloud-based solutions. I'm not an advocate of anything right versus wrong, and I would be intrigued to see solutions that look at infrastructure like that in some of the assignments. But basically, the point of the assignment is to take these menus, take these possibilities, and based on the written criteria, tell me what could make sense. Okay, I'm the client or I'm the project manager. And you're going to come to me and say, Brent, for project 1, try this diagram. For project 2, we're going to try this diagram. And for project 3, this one. I guarantee you all 3 projects will be different, period. And you'll see that when we get to that. So some of the solutions, local server, very simple. I'm sure you've all seen this. Different firms I've worked at, some have distributed file systems, so mapped DFS paths so that if you point to one location, it rationalizes itself to the local server depending on your IP address where you are globally. Other ones, like what we have here at IBI, they're physical mappings, and I have to know where I am to path to it. End of the day, it's all good. It's local server. My point is understand what you have and where you have it. Folder structures, I get pulled into those dialogues. I find that to be mundane and boring, and we're working on just rationalizing standardization so that we can work on automation. So it's all good stuff, local server. Not much more to say on that. WAN acceleration. This is something where, as a BIM collaborator, I get pulled into dialogues about technology I really don't know. So the concept, if basically the sharing between 2 offices can happen faster, would that benefit me? I'll say to them, yeah, definitely. Not much more to say. So if you get pulled into dialogues on funding and cost, that's one thing, but basically it's stuff like this. So we reviewed and looked at Panzura and Riverbed Steelheads as 2 examples of WAN accelerators. Basically, they use proprietary technology to package bits and bytes of data and shoot them at super fast speeds from one target to another target. And I say, great, IT, figure it out. So from my perspective, I'll say, don't become a BIM coordinator, BIM lead, BIM manager, and get bogged down in IT infrastructure, okay? Influence them. So I say to IT, hey, you know what? I need a faster connection from location A to location B. And then I'll be told, well, you can have one or you can't, or maybe it'll be next year's budget, so figure something else out. That dialogue is fine. But when I'm asked, well, Brent, Panzura versus Steelhead, and I'll say, well, I don't know, is one better? Brent, you tell me, and I'll say, whatever, I don't know. And I'll be blunt, I don't know, and there's so many out there. So let the experts, the IT experts, do their job and come to you with concepts, okay? If you build a collaborative solution around WAN acceleration, it's possible. As a project manager, I would see your diagram and I'd say, okay, but is this feasible? My project is starting in 2 weeks. How can we get Panzura set up in these 5 offices? And then they'll say, well, their setup time is quick, but their funding, we don't know. So there's always the risk when it involves on-premise hardware or on-premise type accelerators. So just keep that in mind. As you can see, I know a bit about this stuff, I have no desire to know more about it or too much about it. SharePoint, ever since we've gone to the cloud, I love it. But this is the type of thing that I portray. Some of you made notes that, the environment's a little clunky, and, and I'll admit the SharePoint environment, it's not beautiful. You can make it look way better than what I'm showing in the screen there. But it has a lot of built-in features, and some of the benefits that we're finding in IBI now is its full connectivity to the Teams environment. And I'm not sure if any of you have actually seen, let me just pull up Microsoft Teams here. So with Office 365, sorry, just get back to the slideshow, and then Teams. So with Office 365, Teams, SharePoint, you've got all of this stuff available to you. And if I'll just quickly go into my local Teams site here. I can actually, I'll go to this one here. So you can actually have dialogues of conversation. So it's your chat window, the existence of files. So files here would be residing on a local SharePoint site. So it's a backbone Office 365 SharePoint site that's connected to the Teams environment. And then using Power BI, we're able to take stuff that's hosted in the cloud, plug it into the BI dashboard, and portray our information and visualize it. So these are quick internal things that we have working on. But this is all cloud powered, and I'm at home. I can be in the office. It just doesn't matter. So some pretty phenomenal things, but still not a solution for live CAD BIM authoring. Now I say that, and then if any of you are right away want to challenge, we can definitely dialogue. We've explored putting CAD into SharePoint, using file synchronization through OneDrive. So that's the other thing you can do. OneDrive for Business, synchronizing stuff from the cloud to your local hard drive, and then you open it up in AutoCAD, and you can work. Or Civil 3D, Revit, again, it'll be a bit of a challenge because it's a central model, so I can't take the central model down. But there's ways you could possibly make, but it's not designed for CAD BIM right now. And this is what I want to preface that. So in your solutions, if you want to dare and say, you know what, I'm going to say SharePoint for AutoCAD, you've got to tell me how you would make it work, because I know many ways of how to make it fail. Okay. Project-wise, this is a big one for me. It basically, if I say you can pretty much do everything in project-wise, almost everything. Okay. And I'll talk a bit about that. If used incorrectly, it'll be horrible, and you'll hear it doesn't work, it's slow, it's too hard, etc. If you have proper workflows, it will work. And I've delivered everything from the London Olympics, Panama Canal widening, major projects, treatment plants, civil, linear infrastructure projects, and buildings. Okay? It can work. Now, there's a lot of words here. It has all these functionalities, secured access, check in, check out, etc. The secured access is an interesting one because the ability to control security, who can see what, when, and why, using either just security groups or defined workflows that satisfy BS 1192, WIP, shared, published, all is there. So an example, if I have my architectural model and you're doing structural, I can set, if it's set to work in progress, you can't see it. When I set it to shared, you, the structural engineer, and me, the architect, will see it. When I set it to published, we can make the client see it. So security based on workflow, security based on security groups. The thing that's important with ProjectWise that's different from things like a SharePoint or like a lot of the cloud-based systems out there is that ProjectWise brings interoperability or integration with all those listed. AutoCAD, Civil 3D, Revit, MicroStation, Office, etc. Title block integration. I can have my metadata in ProjectWise, and when I open up a file in AutoCAD or MicroStation, it will update my title block attributes or tags in MicroStation. Integration with Revit, where I can push parameters to and from ProjectWise. It can host the central model and then manage element borrowing and links. I'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah, I can do all of this. And then you say, well, great, that sounds pretty good, right? It can also do server-side printing. So basically, I grab 100 MicroStation files or AutoCAD files, right-click, create PDF, and it goes and does it on the server and doesn't interfere with me. I don't have to run publishing or anything user side. So all of that can work, and then it has transmittals, submittals, and cloud-based things for managing content once it's up inside ProjectWise. I'm going to skip over this slide. So this is what it looks like. So there's basically a cloud cluster of servers, if you will. It runs on a SQL backbone. It has a server infrastructure that hosts everything and makes things talk, and then what it calls distribution and rendition servers that allows it to share amongst instances of Azure scattered across the globe, as well as processing outputs like PDFs, uses local caching to the user's machines or offices, and allows access from anywhere. Now, oftentimes that caching, again, it's all dependent on the internet connection, and that sometimes could be a challenge. But this is ProjectWise, and I'll just echo the successes I've seen in it, but also the failures. And the reason for this, and this is where when you're defining or designing the right solution, you have to stumble upon the wrong ones. So remember earlier in this course, I said BIM is like a cookbook where you have recipes. Some of your recipes are the best. Some of them, you might not use again. Revit inside ProjectWise is a challenge. So basically what it does, and for those who've used Revit, you notice that you know that you can either lock a work set, or if you touch a component and move it, the element is borrowed to you. And it does it quickly, okay? In the world of ProjectWise, the unfortunate instance is when I open up a file, it locks it momentarily. When I sync to Central, it locks it momentarily. When I go to borrow an element or lock a work set, it locks the file momentarily. So you say, and? Well, if I am in the model and I'm moving the door and an element borrows, and you're in your model, you're in the same model, and you want to move the wall. Well, if I'm element borrowing my door, it won't let you element borrow your wall until I'm done with my door. That's the break. So, of course, you get 5, 10 users in the model. You all go to touch an element at the same time. Well, if I win, I'll get mine first, and you all have to wait. And it goes on and on and on. The reason for that, the way Bentley described it, Autodesk uses a concept of interweaving. So digital user interweaving, where if 10 of us go to touch a central model, it interweaves the communication together. So it lets me lock without preventing you from locking, and it interweaves it almost instantly. So if we touch the same door, one of us would win, one of us would lose. But if we're all touching individual components, we lock them all, and it interweaves the lock instantly to all of us. So it's good. Bentley said, we can't win. So what they've done is with 2018, they've said, great, you know what, take your central model and put it wherever you want. So when designing a BIM collaborative solution, the best approach for Revit is to say, I'm not putting it in ProjectWise, but maybe there's a spot to publish to ProjectWise. And that's what Bentley has said. Put your model where you want, whatever is most optimal for your project, and then connect. There's a little ProjectWise part of the ribbon, connects to ProjectWise, and then you push an eTransmit to ProjectWise, push an iModel to ProjectWise, push PDFs of all of your sheets to ProjectWise, or DWGs or DGNs of your sheets to ProjectWise. And it honors whatever is set up in your central model, boom, away it goes. So there, all of a sudden, I just introduced 2 collaborative solutions, one for BIM authoring, Revit, and then one for sharing, ProjectWise. So you think of that. But then what if there's DWG files like AutoCAD and Civil 3D? There you could use ProjectWise as a whip for those, and then sharing for those as well. So that's why I keep saying, think centralized, federated, whip, shared, publish, LAN, cloud, interwoven with all of these. That's what I've just described here. With the new version, it'll kind of publish to ProjectWise as opposed to try and put the central model in ProjectWise, and that will allow you to have all these Revit functionalities that are pushed into ProjectWise as opposed to trying to be housed in ProjectWise. So ProjectWise is a cloud, harnessing cloud hosting. So it does have a connectivity from our perspective to the design portion, but also allowing us to pull information to and from our servers, and then gives these dashboards and online tools similar to BIM 360, similar to Esri Online. So you'll notice a lot of these, even though I'm not going to touch on every single possible solution, this is what happens. So our major vendors, our BIM authoring vendors, are trying to say, we want to give you the platform to author, yet we want to expose and provision you for life cycle management of information. So in Bentley's world, do it all in Bentley, right? But they know they can't win in Revit, so they said, yeah, go do your little Revit piece over there, but then the rest of the life cycle of the project, we have you covered. So that's the Bentley world. I'm just gonna pull this up. Just similar concept. Their idea of federation of information. So they're all about federated data, and you want to push and pull information, whether it's ProjectWise, Revit, your own servers, and share it to your stakeholders. So KPIs, mobile viewing, etc. That's what they're trying to press. Okay, Autodesk is doing the same. We'll get there in a second. BIM authorship. You're going to get on a project. They'll say, hey, I have a Revit model. Well, here's one answer for Revit. Revit server has been around for years. Be very clear. Autodesk is not advancing Revit server. They're continuing to have it. And with each version of Revit, so far it's still there. In 2019 still had it when we installed that. The idea there, again, this is local hardware. You have a host, an accelerator, and a user. So you have one office that hosts the project, and then that gets accelerated to other offices. And that's the mechanism that helps that interweaving, the speed of the interweaving from the users in the multiple locations. I keep saying discontinue technology. So if you use it in the assignment, if it makes sense, great. If it doesn't, use something else. And this is kind of what it looks like when it's installed. You have a Revit server button and you can select your server and away you go. BIM 360 collaboration for Revit. Now, before I go on here, this is, for me, this was groundbreaking, changing the way the things worked. Probably 2016 or 2015-ish, okay? Prior to that, I struggled with, you can't share Revit. And it bothered me. It just bothered me. So Bentley first came out with the Revit integration to ProjectWise. They said, hey, you can't share Revit? Come on over here. Put your Revit central model in ProjectWise and we'll share it. It had all those limitations. But from 2012 to 2015, we could do it. Had to have diligent use of work sets, maybe split the models a little more. But you know what? I've had success doing it when the right people understood that, hey, it's a different workflow and there are limitations. Then these guys came out. It was initially called A360. So I think A360 Drive's been around for a long time. And they said, you know what? We're going to introduce this C4R concept. So great. So they had what was called first, and then they've changed the name so many times it's confused the world, but it's okay. It was A360, now it's BIM 360. So they introduced the Teams environment. It was BIM 360 Teams as an online cloud engine with collaboration for Revit built in. What that meant, you put your central model there and you open it from Revit. Now today they rebranded it to BIM 360 Design using a consolidated online hub. So if you're familiar with plans and docs and doc management and all of those, they've fused all that together, called BIM 360 Design, introducing security and multiple folders and a lot of good stuff, a lot of complexity too, but that's the gist. The main point, one central hub, just like putting a central model on the server, on Revit server, well, now we just dump it in the cloud. Very simple. It's all good. Deltas are locally cached, so it's not moving entire models. Similar with anything cloud, the first time you open it, you might say, oh my God. After the first time, it's bits and bytes that move back and forth. honors the interweaving. So if you and I try to lock different components, that's fine. If you and I try to lock the same, one of us will win, one of us will lose. And yeah, it is phenomenal. Sorry, I didn't update all the slides from the A360 to the BIM 360. From inside Revit, same concept. So this is the other thing that's benefited the user. Once the BIM coordinator sets up that model, file open, it would go to BIM 360 now instead of A360, go to your model, open it. Simple as that. Simple as that. So you go to a user and say, hey, we're using this whole new technology, but from your perspective, nothing changes, just where you open it from. That resonates very well. So every time we look at technological implementation, ease is huge, okay? This is what the hub looks like. So the beauty of the hub, now this is where as BIM modelers, BIM coordinators, we'll get familiar with this. And again, if you use anything online, at the end of the day, a lot of it is all the same stuff with just a different wrapper. So I just wish the world was all one, but it's all good. That's the hub. You can select on a model and automatically view. So the benefit here, and what project managers like is, while the model is in a WIP state, continually being synced to the server, I can actually see a version of it live. I can access this in a live environment and see it. It's quite impressive. So design your approach. I'm nearing the end of the slides here. 4 questions. I'm going to be a broken record. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What are you sharing? Where are you sharing it? What are you BIMing? Why are you BIMing it? Similar over and over. If those first 2 questions cannot be answered, raise the risk flag or just stop. Don't do anything else, okay? Sorry, that's my home line. I need her to, okay, there we go. So let me just see there's a couple hands raised and questions. So let me see what we got here. Let me pull up the question first. So in BIM 360, can we both share Revit, docs, and all documents formats? Okay, so 2 things. So yeah, in BIM 360 right now, let me just go back to this here. You can dump anything in BIM 360. So like a Dropbox, you can throw anything there, okay? But for a BIM WIP authorship, you can put Revit Central models there today. You can do AutoCAD files if you use the desktop connector. But Civil 3D does not have data shortcuts yet. So when you're doing the assignment and one of them says, how am I sharing Civil 3D with data shortcuts? That's still a question, okay? They're growing, their vision is having a full consolidation, because I've been driving them nuts forever, saying, okay, great, you did this for Revit. What about Civil 3D? What about Plant 3D? So Plant 3D, they just introduced Plant Collaborator. So Plant 3D now basically can take that plant-based setup and collaborate through the cloud, whereas before they couldn't. But it still requires a SQL database. So a lot of these, BIM 360 is growing, but I don't want you guys to think that it has everything in order, because it most certainly doesn't yet. Sharif, let me unmute you. You have your hand up. So if you unmute yourself, do you have a question? Sharif? No? Okay. I'm just going to drop all hands then, and then if you do have a question, raise it. Oh, yeah. Okay. Sharif, can you hear me? No? Okay. All right. No, if you have a question, re-raise your hands. Okay. Let me go on here then. So I hope that answered your question. So I was saying, design your approach. I can profess about this or pontificate about this over and over, probably for the rest of my career. And I'll tell you, I have seen failure with number 1 not being answered, or number 2 being answered, but then it changes and not being readdressed. And that's a very critical thing. You might go into a project saying, oh, good, everything's in order. And the minute that additional person is added from another office, it just recently happened. We're doing a major project in Dubai, all on our Toronto server, and they added people from our Southfield office. And all of a sudden, after, I don't know, months of smooth sailing, Brent, nothing's working, nothing. Everyone was going nuts. And then I discovered, oh, well, those 5 people, they're not in the office. Nobody told us. So influencers, non-Revit collaboration. So AutoCAD, MicroStation, non-central Revit files. Think of so internally we would say project-wise, our local server, a hybrid combination. Think about it. Vault, Buzzsaw, BIM 360, whatever makes sense. When it's the Revit Central model, and why I'm stressing on the Revit Central model is even if you're not even if you come from a civil background, which a lot of you do, you come into the world of BIM coordination, you will be faced with Revit. It'll happen, plain and simple, right? So you got to know Revit Central model means there's specific things you have to look for, and then there's everything else. So anything non-CAD, non-BIM, right? Couple options there, but basically it's all of those project files that need to be shared and cannot get lost. Because remember, everything that's part of all of this is all legal record as well. Always stay in the background. I'm going to legal in week 9. All of this stuff is traceable, discoverable part of projects. So when I say hybrid, I kind of took that Bentley slide as a starting point, but I could have projects with all this stuff and more. And I don't even have Esri GIS on here. You could have ArcGIS online and need to try to connect to content or share content. There's so much that could be built into a project, and it's on us to say, this is how we're sharing and why, okay? And I guarantee, you will never have a project that is just one thing. And the reason I say that is, even if the building is all Revit, you still have civil, you still have integration, so the building is sitting on something and connecting to stuff, and then throughout the life cycle of the project, you still have to mitigate communications, clashes, delivery of permits, everything throughout the life cycle, doing your as-built and record drawings based on information obtained during construction, and delivering something potentially for asset management. It's not all Revit, and it won't ever be. So find the right solution, be mindful with externals, and engage a BIM lead. You are all the BIM lead. That's what we're here studying for. That's going to be part of our role. Whether you're doing it wholeheartedly, so full-time, part-time, it doesn't matter. Whether you're assigned to one project or you're trying to govern all projects in a firm, somebody has to lead, okay? And when I say predicting the future, for me, the cloud is the best means to collaborate on a global scale. And I say that fully understanding that, concepts of Citrix Online and VDIs, and even those are quasi-cloud going into major data center infrastructures. But cloud has to be in a solution, because when you look at all the projects that are starting, Canada, that multi-billion-dollar pipeline, the transit projects, major infrastructure, major industrial, all of these are multiple entities, and it's all about living information, okay? So if it is about living information, it's not going to be about, hey, I got a job at an architect's office and they're building a Revit model and it's just on their local server. Yeah, I guess temporally that could be a solution, but it's going to go beyond that, okay? Living data. For me, I've been mixtures of all these solutions and then some. And for shared and published, my goodness, it goes on and on forever. And shared is unique, because once I've authored BIM content, that sharing could go throughout the life cycle of the asset, not just the project. So remember that too. Try to keep it as simple as possible. So think about that in the assignment as well, right? You might be able to give me a solution that technologically makes sense, but may be so complex. If they're simpler, that's great. But use this assignment to just explore, okay? Right technology, right workflows, temper the expectations with your people when you're delivering it to them. And then I always say scope, schedule, and budget are things to look at when we're on real projects. So to close, let me show I have a couple of diagrams. So the assignment says, make a collaboration diagram. So I don't want essays, and we're not writing anything. You're just telling me a story by a picture, okay? Because, and so the first reason for that is because I'm a project manager. I'm going to listen to you talk. If you give me a 30-page essay on how to share, I'm not going to read it. And I know that because I've done it. They don't get read. They will not be read. BS 1192 is so successful because it has diagrams and it portrays what it's going to do. Second thing is these all get basically attached into the BIM execution plan. So there's a section on collaboration. I can't remember which one it is, section M or N, whatever. You say this is what we're collaborating, and you just basically jam that diagram right in the BXP. No questions asked, people know. So pictures speak 1,000 words, and this is very important for me. So I think I can't remember if I showed this yet, but this would be an example where, you know, I've got, these are the applications we're using, and they're being shared into ProjectWise, the deliverable of MicroStation. And then I have my plant tools. So in the projects, I'm going to say, these are the applications being used. So notice what's happening there. I've got my building, my civil, and my plant. My plant has modeling and the P&ID, the diagrams. Has this SQL database in the background. And then this BRCM is a raceway tool. So this was from a project of mine. They all talk to each other in the Bentley world, and we're delivering DGNs, some civil AutoCADs, etc., using Navigator for review. So this is the start of a diagram showing the software that I have. And part of this is looking to say, okay, I'm saying ProjectWise can be used for all of this, except for that SQL database that's hanging out there on left field. And then there's some Civil 3D. But ProjectWise for me, in this solution, allowed all my files to live. I don't have a central model. There's no Revit here. So ProjectWise can host everything, host the data shortcut. But the plant tools have to talk to this other SQL database. So in the brief for a project like this, I was faced with multiple offices are working on civil, on the building. I have multiple disciplines on the building. On the plant, I had to know who was working on what and from where. And I had to find out, where do I got to put that SQL database? So in this example, the SQL database was in one singular office. So I was okay, as long as people knew that that's where the work was being done. So I was able to host the file in ProjectWise, but I had to have the SQL database in the one location. Here's another example, and this was a project that we did recently. A lot simpler, right? We used ProjectWise to hold a shared version of the content and two offices in IBI group. So two different offices. Here it was very explicit. The RH office, Richmond Hill, was doing just Civil 3D. The Toronto office, the main one, is going to do Revit. So we said we'll do local hosting, sync it up to the cloud to allow for the external entities to connect. So, okay, Sharif, you raised your hand. I'm going to unmute you, and you have to unmute yourself if you want. Oh wait, let me see. Okay, there. You're unmuted. Do you want to unmute yourself, Sharif, if you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. I tried to do, to say this question, but I think you didn't hear me. Anyways, I have a group. We're doing a project at school, and I think this approach would make us more interested to do it as a collaboration through ProjectWise or 360, Autodesk 360. So all of us have Revit. We're working on Revit platform.
Right.
And if I'm assuming that one of us gonna work with ArchiCAD instead, can we use ProjectWise, or it's not gonna be compatible with that?
ArchiCAD, no.
No.
And that's, yeah, so that's a struggle. So, and that's part of the challenge in the assignments. Instead of, I didn't use ArchiCAD, but I used SmartPlant 3D, but same concept. So those are authoring. So ArchiCAD is a building authoring tool that does not work with ProjectWise. SmartPlant 3D is a plant authoring tool that does not work with ProjectWise.
So we have to be on one authoring tool, which is Revit.
Or you'd have to say somebody's working on ArchiCAD, because at the end of the day, and I've had this in the past, you might have a client that says, no, the structural engineer is going to be in ArchiCAD and the architect is in Revit. It'll work, but it would be essentially ArchiCAD to IFC linked into Revit, Revit to IFC linked into ArchiCAD probably.
Yeah, it's just for the sake of practicing, and if in the future we run into something like that. So that's why, because I know that had started.
Ideally, yeah, you'd want like if it was like if you guys were just trying to do something for one of the other parts of the class, yeah, you'd want to all get into Revit just for simplicity. Yes. But if it was in the real world, yeah, you could make the other two work. It would just be a little challenging.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
No problem. And then the last diagram I have here, yeah, this is just another one internally. So here we were looking at how to harness Aconex as the overall sharing mechanism for shared and published, knowing that we had multiple WIP locations. So I'm just showing you as an example. I'm not going to dwell on why I had made this, but it's just to get you the point of, what is a collaboration diagram? So ideally for the assignment, if you want to make life easier, I could almost say that's at the end of the presentation. I could almost say, go to, hold on, Brent, where is it? Go to here, grab the PowerPoint, delete everything, go to those last 3 slides and use them potentially as the base to start your diagrams. It's all good. Make your own from scratch. It doesn't matter. The easiest just give me back a PowerPoint with collaboration diagrams, and whether you use mine as a starting point, just obviously, I don't want this to be an exercise in PowerPoint. Okay, so those are there if you want them as a starting point. The assignment. So what I've done, okay, so the instructions: create plausible BIM collaboration solutions, harnessing any possible tools discussed during the course. And even if we didn't formally discuss it, if it's something you might be familiar with, by all means, okay? Remember, LAN Cloud, WIP shared published, central versus federated, okay? All of that's going to come into play. And what I'm asking you to do here is to create 3 diagrams for each project. So and the importance here is these project descriptions will come into play again at the end of the course. The final presentation, you'll all be assigned, each group will be assigned one of the 3 projects, okay? So this will get you even so I don't want to introduce, I don't want to write 10 different project examples. I don't want you to have to be faced with them. So this is them. And when we go to the technical solution in the week 8's assignment, it'll involve the same base projects. So you just maintain that familiarity. So I'm not introducing new stuff every single time. But the idea here of project 1 is more of a building focus. So it's a high-rise tower. I give you the disciplines. I give you authoring tools. And notice I'm trying to introduce some things. So stuff in AutoCAD, electrical schematics, okay? Locations. So notice some locations are global, some are one office, okay? So one firm, multiple offices, maybe just one office, different deliverable types. And then the second project is a high-speed rail. So it's a transit project. So linear project, not just buildings. Authoring tools are varying. Here I've got a bit of Revit, a bit of EcoSim. Bentley Autodesk, and Base AutoCAD. Okay? And the reason I'm doing this, I hope it's quite obvious, just even based on the last question. I don't want a collaboration solution on how do I share my singular Revit model. I think we all kind of know that's pretty easy. I want you to think on, oh my God, what would I do if I've got to share all this stuff? And I put these in here because I've had to. And then here, look at the locations. 8 architecture firms, 4 using Revit, 4 using EcoSim, and very plausible. I'm making this up based on the experiences I've had on the Olympics, on the canal. Masdar City was a beauty. It was just a little bit of everything everywhere, okay? Civil is not just your site around the building. Civil rail, civil site, civil utility, site electrical, traffic signals, communications. And this, this is a bunch of active projects we have now today, okay? The contractor's poking in, the owner's poking in. And this is important because, especially this guy right here, owner's not authoring, but owner wants to see. Esri deliverable, map files. Third project is a water treatment plant. So I wanted to bring in the industrial. So building, civil, plant. And I do project number 3 because oftentimes BIM is assumed or thought of as only the vertical buildings. So in the third project, notice the authoring tools. I said, Revit for all the buildings, keep it simple. But that's only architecture. EcoSim for structural and MEP. And then you sit there and say, come on, Brent, they could all be in Revit. I say, I know. And I've had crazy, crazy projects where it's been that way or the flip way. The architect is in EcoSim and the engineering is all in Revit. And you're sitting there saying, why? So don't get bogged down on the technical. So it's not about what's good. This assignment is not about the mechanism of how EcoSim gets to Revit or Revit gets to EcoSim. That'll be later. This is simply about, I've got people that are going to share Revit. I've got people that are going to share EcoSim. What do I do? And then the other stuff in here too. And I'll just stress on this project. So that's a bit of a twist, right? You got to share these files. Think of the diagrams, right? You're going to host this central model somewhere. You're going to host basically this Bentley stuff somewhere else. Then you got this. You've got your plant-based stuff with the SQL database, okay? And notice the force, okay? So just to direct you. So there's no SQL in the cloud. This is going to be force. It's in an office, in a lab. Could be for data, could be for security, whatever. It's forced in an office. So it takes away that, because it's almost an easy solution if you say, well, we'll just throw it up in the cloud. Yeah, I know. But couldn't do that in the past. And there's some offices that won't let you do that. Okay? A bit about the locations and the digital deliverables. So this assignment, really the deliverable is the 3 diagrams. Okay? So use the PowerPoint if you want it as a base. However is the best way to portray it. Don't make it an exercise in PowerPoint, and just think about it. Think about what we've talked about. Think about what we've learned in this class, and hopefully gleaning on stuff from the other classes as well. And you'll be fine. So that's all I had for today. Any questions or comments? Just see, was there another? No. Let me just pop out the question pane here. Okay. For design bid build, is there supposed to be 3 sharing solutions, one for internal, one for construction, and no. So for the design bid build project, just one solution. So I put DBB here. Yeah, I don't want you guys to get thrown off course here. The solution would be for, basically this would be a design project. So for the design bid build project. So notice here, I'm not talking, yes, the reason I say it's a design bid build, because when you go through the dialogue here, you have your design disciplines, your authoring tools. The locations are basically all your design disciplines. Whereas in the P3 project, you have your contractor and owner that are part of the collaboration solution. So that's the point here. This, in the design bid build, you're going to deliver this. In the P3, these guys are going to be in your system, whether you want it or not. So they're in there. You're just going to have to make sure you have accounted for that. And this being a design build, notice the contractor is going to have a site. So, and the reason I've put them in there is because, what's a good example? Let's say it's a design build project and it's a building. Okay, I've got my Revit model and I'm happy. One office, I'm going to throw it on Revit server. But if it's design build and the contractor wants perpetual access to your Revit model, what do? So in that example, this example, this is actually sort of that situation. We had two buildings. They were doing the civil part, but the contractor wanted access. So we said, well, crap, we don't want to put the whole team in ProjectWise just so they can see Revit. So we did this synchronization. So we're doing our live, synced it, I think, every couple hours, and they had their access. So that's why I threw in the project types here. Don't get bogged down on that because we haven't really talked much about project delivery and the nuances. That's going to be in week 9, but that's just to say these project 2 and 3 have non-design personnel poking in. Okay, but good question. Anything else? You type the question or raise your hand. Okay, while you guys are thinking, this is also why I'm stressing, try to do things as quick as possible too. So right now you have 2 assignments open. So I get worried in the activities. I see there's only been 1 submission of assignment, the first assignment from week 3. So I don't want things to boil up, and I obviously don't want you guys to lose grades by not submitting. So again, I can't judge, I can't guide how you work, but the quicker you can knock off 3, then get into this week 5 assignment, the better, so that they're not piling up. And remember, week 3 assignment is due a week from now. This assignment is due 3 weeks, so October 26th. And I think that's when the next assignment opens. So yeah, do what you can. Next week, just a quick look in. Next week, we're going to focus a little back on BIM uses. And the reason here is we're going to look at some of the deep dive, some of the items that we can talk about, talking quite a bit about life cycle. And what I want to do is, we're looking at when uses are used throughout the life cycle of projects, because we've talked about software, we've talked about collaboration. Depending on BIM uses, you might have other pieces built in. So we alluded to Synchro for 4D and some items like that in the previous weeks. I didn't want to get bogged down on these. So in week 4 and 5, it's really about, for me, the core. Like these are the items when you're talking BIM authorship. As the uses expand, obviously they're all going to depend on, well, if I'm going to do clash detection, if I'm going to do cost estimation, if I'm going to do schedule simulation, well, I need a BIM. I need a model. So these all are about the core BIM authorship and sharing. We'll start to expand upon possibilities in week 6 that we introduced back in week 2. Yeah, and then we'll just go from there. If there are no other questions, feel free to email me whenever you need. Wish you all a great weekend, a happy Thanksgiving. I do see we only have 22 people on, so I know the class is up to over 30. If you do see the others, do remind them that this is being recorded and the posting will be put up. You'll find the recording right underneath the PowerPoint later tonight, probably. Don't forget, if you haven't done this week's discussion, do this week's discussion. Next week's discussion will open up as well. So yeah, stay on top of it. And I just hope you guys are having fun. And if there's any feedback, do send it my way. And with that, thank you. Thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend. Bye for now.